Hey guys, how's it going? Brian from Boas here. Today I want to cover a somewhat controversial topic, which is making money by breeding your boa constrictors. First of all, is this even morally acceptable? If so, how likely are you to be able to make money breeding boas? And what are some of the best strategies to potentially make this happen? I'm going to give you my perspective on these and other questions in the next few minutes. If you find this video helpful, I'd really appreciate if you would subscribe to the Brian Boas YouTube channel for more videos on all aspects of keeping and breeding boas in captivity. To paraphrase a common adage, what is the best way to make a small fortune breeding boa constrictors? And the answer to that question, of course, is to start with a large fortune. So I would say that for every person that is successful making money breeding boas, there's probably at least 10 people that try to do this and they're not successful. So just something to consider if you're thinking about going down this route. The other issue I want to get out of the way real quick in this video is the ethics and morality about breeding boas for money. Is it unethical or immoral? And I would say no, there's really nothing unethical or immoral about breeding boas for money and for profit, as long as the welfare of the animals is the number one consideration. And you have to put the welfare of the animals above any money, above any profit. And that's where it sometimes gets difficult for people. So I would say if you're trying to make money breeding boas, never lose sight of the fact that the boa's welfare has to be number one. And this is the best way of being successful in the long term. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of people advertise their boas as investment grade or investment quality, almost as if it's something that you would buy to put into your IRA or 401k for retirement. So I would say that as far as money, boas are really not a good investment. In fact, what they're really good as far as an investment is the enjoyment and the knowledge you'll get from keeping the boas. I mean, this is invaluable. The knowledge and experience you can gain, I mean, to me, it's worth more than all the money in the world. That being said, people want something that they can invest in and hopefully make some money. And I would say that if you're somebody that heard about your friend who, is making $100,000 a year breeding boas in his spare time, and you want to, get in on that cash cow, I would say it would be absolutely a horrible idea to try to invest in boas. We've also all heard the stories about the people who invested big in a new morph of boa or ball python, and they were able to make a huge amount of money. And there are a handful of individuals that have done this successfully. But as we know, breeding morph boas is basically a pyramid scheme. So you have the people at the top who are able to get the largest amount of money, and then as the years go on, people are at the base of the pyramid and they're not really getting that much money out of the project. So when a morph first comes available, the supply is very low and the demand is high, so the price is very high. And then as the generations go on, the supply increases, the demand decreases, and the prices will plummet. A morph boa might start off in the $10,000 range, and then one generation later it might only be in the $5,000 range. A few years after that, with the next generation, you might be looking at $1,000 to $2,000, and then eventually, in usually 10 or 15 years time, it reaches a level where it's just slightly higher than some of the normal wild type boas. Some morphs do hold their value better, things that people really like and want, like the VPIT positives. Other morphs eventually reach a point where they're not that much more than just a normal wild type boa. Another issue with the whole morph breeding concept is that it's been assumed that if you have a new morph at the very beginning, it can justify price ranges in the $10,000 or so range. And I would say this isn't really true. When morphs first came out, they were new, and there were some very striking morphs, and maybe it was worth these $10,000 range. But there have been a number of so-called morphs over the years that they're just not that striking. They're just a very minor variation, it doesn't really look all that different or all that, striking or, captivating compared to just a normal boa. So just because something has a difference in the pattern or even the color, and the difference is genetic, doesn't mean it's going to be a new morph that can justify these huge prices. It's got to be something that people really want. It's got to be striking to look at. It's got to be beautiful. And it also has to be healthy. If there's any health issues related to the specific morph, people aren't going to want it, and it's not going to justify those kinds of prices. I think over the last couple decades, the morph concept has been very popular, but the popularity is starting to wane as people discover the natural beauty of locality boas, where you don't have the same issue with this whole pyramid scheme. In contrast to the morph boa prices, the prices of many locality boas have doubled or even tripled over the last 10 years as people rediscover them and are beginning to really appreciate them. So moving on, I would say the best strategy for you to potentially make some money breeding your boas is to get into a project not to make money. In other words, you want to pick a project because you love the animals, you're passionate about the animals, you want to propagate them and appreciate them and really enjoy all that they have to offer. You need to be persistent and probably put in about 5 years on average for a typical project, from acquiring the babies to raising them up to breeding them and getting the next generation. And then at that point, there's the possibility of making some money in return. But again, not because you set up to do the project specifically to make money, but because you did the project and it turned out to produce some beautiful animals that other people appreciate and they want in their collections, and they're willing to give you money for them. Of course, 5 years is a pretty large chunk of time, and some people might not have the patience. They might not want to wait 5 years for their first litter, and so they try to acquire adult breeding stock from someone else. And sometimes this is possible. For example, if someone was in a situation that changed, a living situation, they had to move out of their apartment or whatever, and they had to sell their snakes because of this. So in addition, sometimes you can find breeders whose direction is kind of changing and they want to get rid, or they want to sell a project they're not really that passionate about anymore. Sometimes this is possible. However, the best way to get really high quality breeding stock is to grow them up yourself. That way they're going to be adapted to the environment in your facility. You'll know all of their, in and outs and all of their mannerisms and all of their idiosyncrasies. It's more likely you're going to be successful that way than bringing in adult boas to try to breed. Another thing is, why would somebody want to raise some babies and put in all the time only to sell them when they reach reproductive age? It doesn't make sense. So there's a possibility there's some kind of issue with these particular boas if someone is selling them. When you're selecting the types of boas that you're going to breed, hopefully to make some money on, you should really think twice about the commercial demand for that particular boa. Do people want these boas, and is there a commercial market for them? So although your passion and your appreciation for the particular boa should be the number one concern, it also pays to choose something that there is a high commercial demand. And animals that have a high commercial demand tend to command higher prices as well. If you're breeding a more common boa that there's a large supply of, chances are good that even if you're successful breeding them, you're not going to be able to even cover your operating costs. And then you might have a glut of boas that nobody really wants, that you have to take care of and maintain and find homes for. There are quite a glut of more common types of boas, like common, normal, pet store type boas. And a lot of humane societies have unwanted boas that need homes, that someone had to, get rid of due to some situation. So really, it doesn't make any sense to breed boas that are very common and that there's not any demand for, because you're just going to be contributing to the homeless boa population. When one is planning the outcome of a boa breeding project, there's a temptation to do a sort of paper exercise where you project the likely outcome of your efforts. And it might go something like this. You might think that these are boas that can start breeding at 5 years of age. They can have a litter of 20 babies every other year starting at 5 years. You know, the babies have a value on the market of $300 a piece. So then you do the math and you figure out how much money that you're going to bring in over the next 20 years. And rarely does it work out like this. These types of projections are always very optimistic. You really have to expect the unexpected in terms of costs that are going to come up. Maintaining a collection of boas is very expensive. You're talking about a lot of unplanned expenses. Vet bills, needing new cage supplies, your thermostat might break and you need a new one. You know, your rodents, you have to set up rodent breeding facility in order to feed your babies, etc. And it gets very expensive. It's always a lot more than you think it's going to end up costing. And then the results of your crosses don't fulfill the expectations. The litters aren't as big. You might have a female that slugs out. You might have some kind of, reproductive related health issue. Unfortunately, it never works out like we imagined in our minds. And so I've seen a lot of people that they get into boas or any kind of reptile, and for the first few years they're really excited about it, and it's all they talk about and it's all they want to do. And then after the years, just the constant grind of cleaning cages and feeding animals and doing all the mundane tasks that are, probably 95% of what you have to do to breed boas, it just really starts to get to them. And they're making a lot of sacrifices in other parts of their life. So I've seen lots of people that get out of breeding boas, typically after anywhere from like 3 to maybe 6 or 7 years. The reality of what they thought it was going to be just didn't stack up to what they thought it was going to be. What's kind of strange is that I've seen these people, they don't just scale back. They don't just maybe get rid of half their boas and hold on to their favorite projects. Usually they sell out 100% and they have no more boas. They just go from being so into it to being really no interest at all. And I've seen this not just with boas, with a lot of different reptiles, and really going back to when I was a child. I'm talking about 35 plus years ago. I've seen people that get into reptiles and get out. It's just kind of a weird phenomenon. And again, they don't keep their favorite projects. They just sell off everything to get all together. So if you're one of the few people that can get through this initial period and you're satisfied with your reptile breeding over the long term, I'm talking about more than a decade, eventually you can start to make some money. And first off, you're probably going to want to reinvest the money that you bring in. You're going to get enough money to cover the operating costs of next year's breeding, and then maybe a little bit more that you can use to buy some new equipment or buy a couple new boas. I would caution though that if you have a particularly good year, don't be tempted to splurge on expensive equipment like expensive custom caging or very high-end boas that normally you wouldn't want to buy. Because a lot of people have this really good year and they get very optimistic, and then they go in quite a bit deeper, and then the next year doesn't stack up to the previous year. And they've already blown a lot of the money that they made the previous year on these expensive things that they normally wouldn't have invested in. So in conclusion, it is possible for you to make money breeding boas. However, there are a lot of ways to make money that are simpler and more straightforward and more definite. So you should really think twice if you're getting into boas specifically to make money. So I wanted to end the video by actually getting out a morph boa. This is a VPI T-positive albino male. This guy is born in 2017, so he's about 3 years old. And I grabbed this guy because at the beginning of the video I was talking about the pyramid scheme that morphs represent and how the values go down, and how people should really pick morphs that are going to be very striking and beautiful and very desirable. And I would say that the VPI T-positive is arguably the most striking and beautiful morph there is. And this is just a one gene animal. He doesn't have anything else. And you can see how beautiful he is. Just this beautiful blondish, lemony yellow color. He's got these gorgeous pinkish highlights on his sides. And what's great about this animal, it doesn't scream it's some kind of genetic mutant. It just looks like a nice boa, a nice very light boa. You know, it's got the normal wild type boa pattern. You know, great animal. And you know, when these first became available, probably around 2 decades ago, they were in the, you know, tens of thousands of dollar range. I don't know exactly what the price was, but the price on these, of course, came down, but not as much and not as fast as some of the other morphs. And I think when I got this guy, he was maybe 600. This is a few years ago. Now the price is probably about $100 less on average for a VPI. Maybe you can get one for 400. But I think that this is probably about the basement for these guys. I think they'll always hold a premium of several times what a typical, you know, normal common boa goes for. It's just such a striking and beautiful morph that it's very desirable, and people are going to want this. So that's something you should think about when you're thinking about what types of boas that you're going to be breeding. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments you may have on boas and breeding boas. Thank you for tuning in, and enjoy your boas.